going to talk about some CI/CD. I'm going to talk about what CI/CD is, and I'm going to talk about CI/CD with GitLab. So I'm going to start talking about this sort of thing more often. I've been talking about automating boring things in general over the past month since January. It's a new year. It's 2023. And with that comes a lot of new things, new ideas, new possibilities. And so one of the things that we've been working on for years, so some context on myself. For those who are new to following me, my name's Nate O'Reilly. I work with DevSecOps. I work with companies like Cloud Underground and a company called Underground Ops. I run something called the DevSecOps Dojo, and I am a GitLab partner. And we also provide managed services through one of the companies called Underground Ops. So for anyone who is looking for managed CI/CD, that's the sort of thing that we focus on and provide. But we also share our managed service provider business model because in the heart of open source, we are very much so believers in sharing our knowledge, open sourcing a lot of the things that we do. And while we do have paid sources, one of the reasons we even like working with resources like GitLab, because GitLab lets you choose, do you want to just work with open source resources, or would you prefer to work with, say, like GitLab Premium or GitLab Ultimate? You get different things depending on what you're going to do, but open source is a thing that we care a lot about. Now, CI/CD, what is it? It stands for, I'll just write this down, continuous, we'll say continuous integration and continuous delivery. So when we talk about the idea of CI/CD, we're talking about continuous integration and continuous delivery. One thing that you'll see a lot when we're talking about tools like GitLab, and if you're wondering where might you see this sort of thing, oftentimes this is related to either DevOps or DevSecOps. Now, the only real difference between these two, DevOps, DevSecOps, DevSecOps is considered what's called a shift left initiative, intended to bake security practices into DevOps pipelines to add security automations to your pipelines so that you're not just launching out potentially vulnerable code and then trying to bolt security on top after the fact. So that's kind of the idea of how this works. DevOps and DevSecOps are actually philosophies. So for anyone who's like, well, I keep hearing DevOps and DevSecOps, and I hear all these different opinions and all these different things, but which one's right? Well, ultimately, they are philosophies, so you will find that at different companies, they'll have different approaches and different ideas of what that means to them. Now, for those who have not seen GitLab, GitLab, if we take a look at it, it's a development platform where you can come in here and create work that you're doing for whatever you're trying to create. So if you're trying to more or less save a portfolio or things that are important for you, or research, you can use GitLab for that sort of thing. GitLab is also something where you can basically store your infrastructure and entire systems in the form of text. So you can basically save entire data centers in the form of code, basically. If you've ever heard of infrastructure as code, tools like Terraform, things like that, Docker, Kubernetes, that sort of thing is something that can be managed with CI/CD. So since we spend a lot of time also trying to figure out how can you keep your DevOps pipelines more secure, my general focus is primarily on helping folks understand DevSecOps. So we're going to be talking about concepts like CI/CD and all that good stuff from a DevSecOps standpoint. So let's go ahead and take a further look here. And actually, one thing that I'm going to pause over is what are the kinds of, like, I guess, high level concepts of like how does a business use automations, and how exactly do we use automations? At a high level, I do have a glance of anyone who's taken a look at my LinkedIn page itself. And I haven't been paying attention to the LinkedIn comments, so I should probably pay attention to the LinkedIn comments in case anyone is at the point where you have questions or anything like that. Feel free to start chatting with me in the comments. I'll start paying attention to that. But one of the ways that we use CI/CD, if you go to my LinkedIn page, I have a link that provides a Drop Squad MSP business model. If you check out this business model, we do share how exactly we are able to spin up our systems, how we run our business, like generally how we eat, how we survive, how we figure out anything in our lives. And so we also teach these concepts in what's called the DevSecOps Dojo, and Cloud Underground helps provide both infrastructure and technologies and means to be able to automate your own pipeline, your own business. And we sort of piggyback on somewhat of an Airbnb inspired approach to delivering managed services. I've been talking about this before already for a while, so this is not quite the focus of today's discussion. Today's discussion, if you want to see more about this, you can look at some of the past streams that I've done last week. But today we want to focus more on CI/CD. So let's talk CI/CD. Talk CI/CD to me. That's right. The good stuff. So let's get into it. When someone is more or less building a business or building a product or just building technology, and you want to have some automation, because you can use CI/CD to build either a video game or to build cybersecurity tools or even websites. So if you go over to a website, oftentimes a lot of modern websites, even LinkedIn, they use CI/CD to constantly, continually manage and update a website. So let's say that you have basically a cloud environment. We're going to build out an example here for let's say that you want to do CI/CD for a website. So if you're going to build a website and then benefit from using CI/CD to maintain that, first you're going to need a cloud environment, basically a place to host your website. It's really important to just keep in mind that websites generally don't actually exist without something hosting the website. I think for a lot of folks who don't spend a lot of time with servers and infrastructure, technology can feel a little bit like magic. Welcome and good evening for folks joining. Yeah, it can feel like magic. It can feel mysterious when things are changing on the internet, and then we have an outage on something like LinkedIn, or we have an outage on something like Facebook or Google. We've seen outages on so many different platforms. CI/CD is designed to help make it so that patches and updates and changes can be made to a website without taking the whole website down or taking the whole forum down or whatever we're working on. So in order for you to have, say, a continuous product or a continuous web app, or in our case a website, then let's say the goal here is we're building a website, right? So the website, we could consider that perhaps a front end, right? So we're going to just call this a front end. So when you see some of the jargon floating around when people are talking about development and creating things, you just get a bunch of jargon usually, and they're like, this is a front-end engineer. And for someone who doesn't know what that means, that's the person who's working on the visuals, the things that people see. So we could also say, we could consider the cloud environment behind the website the back end. So it's really important to delineate the difference between the two of, generally a website doesn't exist without a back end. A web app of any sort generally won't exist without a back end. And so then that brings us to, that's the part of a business that starts to cost a little bit of money. If you are going to work with, say, Google or AWS or Azure. Doesn't really matter which one you're using. Or you could even go with on-prem, and in some cases, some people start talking about this whole thing called like hybrid cloud. Let me show you at a glance a visual of just how confusing cloud gets before I start ranting about, well, you know, what does that mean or what does that look like? What's this back-end thing? Oh, this is going to scare everyone for those who haven't seen this. So the concepts of on-prem and cloud don't apply the same way with what's called cloud native. Cloud native is something that's a little different from, I guess, conventional cloud, in that if you have a cloud native on-prem server, that can be an on-prem cloud native cloud. Or you can have AWS, which is a cloud in a cloud hosted space. It's very confusing. So cloud can be any of these many things. So many things that when we ask, well, what exactly is the back end? This is what generally costs the big bucks, because people have to be able to dig through all this stuff. They have to spend months and years trying to organize all of these things, and it can be very confusing to figure out, okay, so I'm trying to build something that's going to deploy maybe Minio on here, which is one of the things in here, and maybe you're going to deploy something else called Envoy, and maybe Kubernetes, and who knows what else with it, right? Even AWS and Azure are on the cloud native landscape. So cloud native is sort of like this big behemoth creature of a sort that every single one of these independent resources on the back end can take days or months, and this is generally boring stuff. There are individuals who think this is fascinating and fun. I'm one of those. I actually really like some of these things. What I run into is I'll start talking about stuff that I'm excited about on these things, and people's eyes glaze over, and they're like, "You're talking about what?" And then they start getting frustrated with me, and then they start telling me that I can't simplify anything, and they'll say something like, "If you can't say something simply, you don't understand it enough." And it's like, hold on. I can't explain this simply. I need you to understand at least 1% of this for us to like make these explanations a little more straightforward. So I really want to spend some time talking about why is it that cloud is so incredibly overwhelming and so incredibly confusing. So we spent about 2 years creating basically one resource that copy pastes about 2 years worth of configurations of stuff from here, and that's an example of something that you can do with GitLab. I'll even show you what that looks like. And so we're going to talk about, in our case, we do have a website, so I'm even going to show you a website too. I'm going to show you a live thing. So while I'm talking about whiteboard things and being hypothetical here, let's stop being so hypothetical and let's look at a website being developed, or better yet, a deep web website that we created that only exists in a deep web that you can't actually find somewhere, because that's, I mean, you can do that, so why not? So hopping over here into one of our cloud native clouds, right? This is one cloud. And then we have a distributed data center, so we also have portions of resources that we save on GitLab.com. So this is in GitLab.com. And then we also have an entire room that is configured to run this page right here. And then that room that configures basically this page right here makes this possible. And it makes this exist. And while it took 2 years to build and configure all of whatever this thing is, so let me minimize this here. We're looking at a browser inside of a browser. That's what we're looking at. And we're also looking at an entire sort of a cloud operating system in Linux inside of a browser as well. So this whole structure is a cloud instance that can be copy pasted wherever you're trying to build development. And in our case, you know, we do a lot of web development, cloud development. If we were to build, say, a website right here, so this is a website powered by WordPress. In order for this website to exist, while it's really exciting and cool once it's built, and then we have this immortal thing that just kind of runs forever, and then we can, if someone's like, well, how can I spin up a structure that will help me get started faster with my boring things that I'm trying to automate? Well, this sort of a thing will get someone kickstarted where you don't have to spend the 2-year journey to at least have sort of like a vanilla template that already has everything here. I could teach you how to build this, and I could teach you how to build this, or I could tell you to automate all of these things and get a template. So we use a template. The template that I'll show you, if you're wondering what's the template that we use to develop cloud resources in, is if you go to cloudunderground.dev, we have something called the Underground Nexus, and if you check out the Underground Nexus, this is a copy-pasted structure that configures roughly 2 years of configurations, and we just forever maintain it now. So whoever's using it gets all of the stuff that we maintain for ourselves, our clients, anyone who's using this resource. But GitLab allows you to do this sort of a thing, and you don't ever have to even use the stuff that we make. But if you learn the CI/CD skills for yourself, you can make your own of whatever this sort of thing is, where you can run companies for yourself, you can help manage other people's companies, and instead of spending 2 years every time you're trying to set up an environment or a bunch of servers for people just so that they can have a website, you can just chop off 2 years of that journey and just focus on starting to build your website. And so that's, one of the kinds of things that when you do CI/CD, it makes that possible where you can sort of pre-package things so that they can run. So anyways, let's take a deeper look here. So we're going into the weeds today. I don't usually just start just showing random stuff. Usually I sit there with like a whiteboard or some beautiful slides, or I'll show you our business model slides, which you can go look at yourself, which then that's a lot more structured and organized than me actually talking about what it actually looks like. It's quite all technology in cloud's quite messy. So for this website to exist, there has to be effectively some form of a backend. And so we actually have an entire backend that just kind of runs, and you can see that in this list, this is because this thing's not authorized, so I have to log back into it. But before I refresh it, because it'll log me out as soon as I refresh it, notice that it says GitLab is running in here, and then we have all these runners, and then I guess it doesn't matter if I have to log back into this thing, so let's just refresh it and let's find our website. So if we go over to our backend here that makes this website exist, because this website literally only exists because of a huge, crazy, terrifying backend. We take a look at services. We can see that there's this thing that says Underground WordPress, and it has a database, and then we have this other thing that says WordPress right here. And websites don't really exist without all of this gymnastics and jungle gym craziness, basically all these things. Then we can take a look at the greater backend. We actually can't even make this possible without this, pretty much this entire stack here. So in order for us to have one website, we have all of these different things. And so this is one of the reasons why it starts to get complicated when building a product or building a business or trying to build just learn it. Just trying to learn this stuff. It's like, well, okay, so I'm learning how to do some Python in one container, but what's it supposed to lead to? Or, okay, so I'm designing this website, and all I want to do is build the website, but I can't build the website because all of this stuff is chewing up my life. And if you don't like doing all of these things, it's not really everyone's joy to just sit here and deal with configurations for days on end. So that's one of the reasons why we focus on trying to help others find ways to keep this organized so it's not just pure, raw, untamed chaos that just basically makes business impossible to run. If anyone's ever heard of Kubernetes, this is a Kubernetes focused engine for hosting Kubernetes cloud applications. So the ultimate goal is just to try to, how do you simplify all of these things? How do you follow all of this stuff? And so for anyone who wants to just start tinkering around with this template to have a sandbox that is what you could consider a golden image that gets you started, where you can actually come in here and even edit this website to start building website templates if you want to. The Underground Nexus makes that possible, and it also deploys GitLab inside of there so that you can basically keep all of your information organized and off of the public cloud, so you can deploy this structure away from the public cloud as well. So anyways, the whole idea is, with resources like Git these days, how does it all work? So let's take a look at GitLab, because GitLab is then the piece that's even beneath all of those little components. So none of those components deploy or exist or start distributing themselves without this layer. So there's this Git BIOS thing that I keep showing. What exactly is a Git BIOS, and what is it? How exactly does it work with the Underground Nexus? So I'll talk about that a little bit. There are these things called runners. So for anyone who's spent enough time with GitLab, then you've probably heard of something called a GitLab runner. And if I come over here and take a look at my settings, there's this option that says CI/CD. If we select our CI/CD option over here, then whenever it decides to load, then it'll show what I'm trying to get this thing to show. Or I can just open another GitLab instance and show you the same thing, so while we're waiting for that. So anyways, there are these things called runners over here. If you were to come over into GitLab settings and take a look at configurations for something that you're trying to set up, then when you install a GitLab runner that has basically like your code that deploys your structure. Yes, this is the Underground Nexus. So anyways, runners are a resource that you can basically install on a server or a system. And if you're using something like Kubernetes or Docker, then your Docker or Kubernetes resources can be ran or deployed on whatever system you're having GitLab runners deployed on. So GitLab is a great way to basically deploy distributed systems. And if you're trying to have all of your servers configured the same way, you can have all of your servers centralized before you start to scale out servers, so that basically everything stays managed and maintained through your GitLab instance. So I wanted to start talking about this sort of a thing. So one thing that I'm going to recommend playing with for anyone who is wanting to start sandboxing and tinkering around with some of these things is you can actually start playing around with GitLab instances and GitLab runners. So once again, if you do head over to cloudunderground.dev and check out the Underground Nexus, the Underground Nexus is free open source. And if you go and check it out on our website and select the Underground Nexus section and scroll over to where we have this free download here, I'll add it in LinkedIn as well. So let's see. Here is the link for the Underground Nexus. The Underground Nexus is actually a hardened hypervisor. That's kind of the way you could look at it. It's a hypervisor that lives inside of a Docker container. So some things that you'll notice inside of the Underground Nexus is while it has a bunch of containers, it also has the ability and power to run virtual machines. So for anyone who also is in need of basically trying to experiment with automating different systems or testing what you're building and trying to see, like, maybe I want to get a test system to deploy a runner inside of, something you can always do with the Underground Nexus is come in here, set up your GitLab pipeline, which it walks you through how to get started with a private instance of GitLab, since Underground Nexus configures a private instance of self-hosted GitLab for you without you having to configure that yourself. Let's see. It will show right here, GitLab, and it will give you the guidance on how to get into your account, set up your access, and you can come over and set up a virtual machine manager and say add connection, which you'll want to set up basically a user session, and you can select connect that way. And this then allows you to set up virtual machines, which this is an instance that is just more or less a sample instance. But anyways, you can just come in here and start setting up virtual machines. And it's also designed to be able to emulate alternative architectures. Just because sometimes you're trying to develop for, say, like an M1 Mac or something along those lines instead of just your standard AMD 64 system. So this is an ARM64 instance that we're taking a look at here. But thanks to the Underground Nexus, you can choose what sort of platform that you want to do development for. You might have to install additional binaries, so that might take a few more steps to kind of configure. So if you're not familiar with QEMU, you can also head on over to the DevSecOps Dojo, which this is the sort of thing that we do all the time in the DevSecOps Dojo. So for anyone who wants to get deeper and deeper into this, I mostly just, LinkedIn is not usually the best place to show lots of dry configurations beyond just sort of like demoing and things like that. But we just spend a lot of time in the DevSecOps Dojo for those who do want to come over and find other people who just build. The DevSecOps Dojo itself is free. We're just basically a community of developers who just automate stuff all day long. As weird as that sounds, that's literally what we do. What we do with our lives is we just automate things all day long. But anyways, if that's something that you're trying to learn and you're trying to get into CI/CD and you're trying to get into these things and you don't know who to talk to and you don't know who else does this stuff and you're not really sure what DevSecOps is, but you'd like to know, it's just what we do. So with that being said, CI/CD, the way it works, when you're setting up cloud instances, cloud environments, and you're trying to have some way to continuously integrate your resources and make it so that it's always running, our entire Underground Nexus structure is actually a live template and example of CI/CD at play that configures a CI/CD pipeline for you deployed via CI/CD. So it's an entire CI/CD pipeline and sandbox and development space deployed and managed by CI/CD. It even does vulnerability scans via CI/CD, and you can also go and check our vulnerability scans yourself if you go over to hub.docker.com. And for those who really want to try to find things, there is the Underground Nexus repository where you can take a look at the tags and inspect them for yourself. You can go and do your own vulnerability scans, but we do run automated vulnerability scans on these things as well. So DevSecOps, it's a thing. So it is a structure that we also secure for you, and it whenever you're pulling an Underground Nexus instance, then that also means that we've already scanned those resources, and for anything that we deploy in the first place, then it generally will it'll automatically fail itself if it's not stable as well. So if anyone does have questions, once again, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can always come check out the DevSecOps Dojo. And then for anyone who's trying to figure out how to build a business and you're trying to find a business model that is a good way to kind of kick off basically a new company or product or project with a small lightweight team, you can always check out the Drop Squad Survival Guide, which is the business model that we follow for Underground Ops, which is also made in the DevSecOps Dojo. So in the DevSecOps Dojo, we came up with our own business models. We came up with our own cloud infrastructure that we use. We came up with our own products, and we also teach business by helping people live business. So for people who want to learn by doing, and it's interesting to you to basically, instead of, you could go to do school, or maybe you're in school or something along those lines, and you're looking for other ways to also get experience and not just learn. We help people gain experience by building and selling your own things if that's something that you're into, or in many cases, most folks just kind of want to build things and learn that way, which works as well. Sometimes just having a portfolio is all you need to get a job. You don't necessarily need to do a whole lot if you're not trying to get customer after customer. I'd say it's much harder to get customers consistently over and over again for people with goals like that versus just building a portfolio to land a job and show off what you're capable of. So anyways, stuff, automate boring things, and using GitLab with CI/CD. So I'm going to go ahead and hop off later, and we'll keep getting into these topics as we go. Thanks for